Imagine for a second that you are holding the private, handwritten diary of a notorious supervillain's absolute closest lieutenant.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right. The guy who actually executed the purges, the guy running the
right.
secret police.
Yeah.
But then, you open the cover, you realize this diary isn't actually written by the lieutenant himself. It's written by his son, his very devoted, deeply grieving son.
That is a massive shift in perspective.
Totally. And immediately, like as you start turning the pages, you were just hit with this massive wall of cognitive dissonance.
You'd have to be.
Yeah, because you have to ask yourself, how much of what I'm reading right now is actual historical truth? How much of it is the result of just unspeakable psychological trauma? And, how much is just pure, unadulterated survival instinct?
Right, and that's exactly the incredibly precarious tightrope we're walking in this deep dive today.
It really is.
Because we are exploring the intellectual and, honestly, the psychological landscape of a book called Beria, My Father, Inside Stalin's Kremlin.
Such a heavy source.
It is. It's a memoir by Sergo Beria, who is the son of Lavrentiy Beria. And, just for anyone who needs a quick refresher on Soviet history, Lavrentiy Beria was the head of the NKVD.
The Soviet secret police.
Exactly. During the absolute heights of Stalin's reign, this guy was arguably the most feared man in the entire Soviet Union.
Second only to Joseph Stalin himself, really.
Right?
And usually, when we look at primary sources from an era like that, we want them to be clean, like an X-ray.
Yeah, you want objective facts.
Exactly. You break a bone, you look at the film, you see the jagged white line, and that's the fact. But here, with this book, the X-ray machine itself has been just completely smashed to pieces.
That's a really good way to put it.
Because we are dealing with a source that kind of defies every conventional metric of objective truth. We have two entirely different Lavrentiy Berias in this text.
We really do. And reconciling those two figures is basically the central epistemological challenge of this entire deep dive.
It's an epistemological nightmare, honestly.
It is, because, okay, on one side of the ledger, you have the Lavrentiy Beria of the established history books, right?
Right.
This is the narrative that was heavily cemented by Nikita Khrushchev. And Khrushchev, we should remember, is the man who ultimately orchestrated Beria's downfall and execution.
So he had a massive vested interest in painting him a certain way.
Oh, absolutely. So in that official Soviet version, which is also largely the Western version, Beria is Stalin's butcher.
The monster.
Exactly. He's a sadistic spy master. He's famously depicted as this horrible sexual predator who prowled the darkened streets of Moscow in a blacked-out Volga automobile.
Kidnapping women off the street with just absolute impunity.
Yeah. He's the architect of mass terror, the ruthless administrator who oversaw the vast, sprawling network of the gulags.
But then you read Sergo's version.
Right.
And the author presents a figure that is, almost unrecognizable.
It's jarring.
It really is. To Sergo, his father was a highly efficient, pragmatic state servant. He was a devoted, loving family man.
Which is just wild to read.
And perhaps most shockingly, at least to anyone who knows Cold War history, Sergo claims his father was actually a closet anti-Stalinist reformer.
Yeah, that's the real bombshell.
He claims Beria despised the Bolshevik system and was just like biding his time, waiting for the right moment to dismantle the whole apparatus.
Which forces us to ask, not just whether Sergo genuinely believes this, but why he believes it.
Right. What are the psychological conditions that forged that belief?
Exactly. Because to understand Sergo's perspective, we really have to deeply analyze what it actually means to live in a world governed entirely by state-mandated lies.
Yeah.
Sergo grew up in the absolute epicenter of the Soviet nomenclatura.
Actually, let's pause on that word for a second. The nomenclatura.
Sure.
Because it gets thrown around a lot in history classes. But it wasn't just like a political party, right? It was almost a caste system.
It was an entirely separate reality. The nomenclatura were the ruling elite. The top-tier bureaucrats, military leaders, party officials.
The VIPs.
Right. And they had access to special stores, special hospitals, specialized schools. They lived behind these high walls in luxury that the average starving Soviet citizen couldn't even fathom.
But there was a catch.
A huge catch. The trade-off for that luxury was perpetual suffocating terror.
Right, because you could be, eating caviar on Tuesday and then taking a bullet to the back of the neck in a basement on Wednesday.
Precisely. And for a child growing up in that environment, the truth is literally unbearable.
Yeah, I can't even imagine.
To acknowledge the empirical reality of what his father did every day at the office, signing death warrants by the thousands that would completely shatter Sergo's psychological foundation.
You had to compartmentalize just to survive.
He had to.
And he's caught in this really bizarre domestic crossfire, too. Because you've got his mother, Nina, who essentially idolized Stalin.
Or at least performed that idolization perfectly.
Right, to protect her son from the lethal reality of their lives. Because if you pretend the system is just, then the horrors make a twisted kind of sense,
Yeah, it's a coping mechanism.
Exactly. Meanwhile, according to Sergo, his father Lavrentiy increasingly despised Stalin in private. But obviously, he had to hide that hatred to avoid a firing squad.
Naturally.
So Sergo grows up in a house where the subtext is always lethal, and the spoken text is literally always a lie.
And that fractured reality completely colors Sergo's worldview. I mean, throughout the whole memoir, he constantly acts as a witness for the defense.
Yeah, he really does.
He's testifying before this imaginary jury of history, desperately trying to salvage the only thing he has left, which is his father's humanity.
But because he grew up in a system where truth was highly fluid.
Yeah, whatever the party dictated on any given day.
Right. Because of that, his own relationship with empirical reality is incredibly warped.
Absolutely.
But I'm looking at this and thinking, if Sergo's vision is this distorted by trauma and denial, why are we even reading it?
That's a fair question.
Like, why not just throw it in the fiction section and move on?
Because of the methodology applied to the text by its editor, Françoise Thom. Oh.
Okay. She is a powerhouse historian, and she essentially saves this book from being just, mere historical fiction.
How so?
Well, she doesn't just present Sergo's narrative in a vacuum. She meticulously footnotes his claims, cross-referencing them with declassified Soviet archival documents.
Oh, wow. So she's fact-checking him in real time.
Exactly. It creates this wild reading experience. It functions almost like an intellectual cage match between Sergo's subjective, traumatized memory and Tom's cold, objective archival research.
That's fascinating. Memory is constantly being fact-checked by history on the very same page.
It's a brilliant editorial structure. I mean, for example, Sergo will dedicate a whole chapter to claiming his father was completely opposed to a certain purge, right? Or a specific ethnic deportation, painting him as this pragmatic, moderating force trying to hold back Stalin's bloodlust.
And then what does Tom do?
Then you drop your eyes down to Tom's footnotes, and she cites the exact archival document signed by Lavrentiy Beria in red pencil, explicitly ordering the logistics of that exact deportation.
Oh, yeah. It creates a profound intellectual tension.
I feel like reading this text is really similar to studying a black hole in astrophysics.
Okay, I like that analogy. Run with that.
Well, you can't actually see a black hole directly because no light escapes it.
Right.
You can only prove it exists and calculate its mass by observing how its intense gravity warps all the stars and light around it.
Yes.
So the empirical truth of Stalin's Kremlin is the black hole. We can't see it directly through Sergo's eyes because his vision is too warped by his love for his father and the terror of his childhood.
Exactly.
But we can measure the distortion.
That is the crucial methodological takeaway here. In this kind of historical research, the bias is the data.
The bias is the data. That's a great way to put it.
We have to stop looking at Sergo's inaccuracies as mere factual errors and start treating them as vital psychological artifacts.
Right.
Sergo's cognitive dissonance, his desperate, agonizing need to compartmentalize the father from the monster, it perfectly maps the psychological requirements for surviving inside a totalitarian regime.
Because if you couldn't compartmentalize, you were done.
Exactly. If you couldn't hold two violently opposing truths in your head simultaneously without breaking, you simply didn't survive.
So the text itself, in its very structure of denial and justification, is like a primary document of totalitarian psychology.
It really is.
Which brings us to how that psychology was weaponized on a systemic level.
Yes, let's get into that.
Let's look at the actual architecture of Stalin's absolute power. Because it wasn't just about secret police kicking down doors in the middle of the night.
No, it was much deeper than that.
One of the most prominent themes Sergo brings up, and that Tom aggressively corroborates with the archives, is Stalin's absolute obsession with rewriting history.
Oh, his obsession was total.
And I don't just mean censoring a few bad articles,
Yeah.
I mean the retroactive creation of reality.
Because control in the past is the absolute prerequisite for controlling the future. If you dictate the historical narrative, you dictate the parameters of what is politically possible today. The source provides a chillingly illustrative incident from 1935 regarding the history of Bolshevism in the Caucasus region.
Oh, yeah, this is fascinating. So set the stage for this for us.
Okay, so in 1935, Stalin is physically destroying the old Bolsheviks.
The people who had actually been there in the trenches during the 1917 revolution alongside Lenin.
Exactly. But physical destruction isn't enough for him.
He needs to erase them from the historical record entirely.
Right. He needs to insert himself as the sole indispensable Leninist visionary. So Stalin orders the institutes of Marxism-Leninism in every Soviet republic to, quote-unquote, correct their historical texts.
Okay. So what happens in Georgia?
In Tbilisi, Georgia, the Marx-Engels Institute was led by a highly respected historian named Beria.
Right.
And Beria produces a new draft of the regional history. Sergo actually recounts how Beria worked really closely with Lavrentiy Beria on this.
They were like staying up late, drinking tea, stressing over it.
Desperately trying to figure out how to reconcile the actual documented facts of the revolution with the mythological fiction Stalin was demanding.
That sounds like an impossible task.
It was. And when they finally submit the manuscript to Stalin, his reaction is just incredible.
Because it wasn't good enough.
Exactly. The draft, despite all their efforts to appease him, didn't go far enough in its sycophancy.
So what does he do?
Stalin has the manuscript brought to him, and he personally edits it. He takes a pen and literally strikes out the names of the actual revolutionaries who did the fighting and organizing.
Wow.
He inserts his own name, and he just claims their historical exploits for himself.
He basically backdated his own prominence.
He totally did. He claimed he was co-opted to the Central Committee years before he actually was.
And we really have to look at the dark absurdity of this.
Yeah.
Like, you have the supreme leader of a global superpower sitting at his desk, acting as his own fan fiction writer.
That's exactly what it was, but the consequences were deadly serious. When someone later had the sheer courage, or maybe just the suicidal naivety, to point out that this quote-unquote history of the Bolsheviks in the Caucasus was basically just a biography of Joseph Stalin.
Oh no. What did Stalin say?
Stalin snapped back, "Don't confuse history and my biography."
That is terrifying.
It is.
It's the ultimate manifestation of narcissistic state power. Like, the state and the self are entirely fused.
Exactly.
But beyond just rewriting books, Stalin's day-to-day management style of the Kremlin bureaucracy was equally manipulative.
Oh, his management style was incredibly toxic.
Right. Because we tend to assume that a dictator wants a highly efficient, unified, well-oiled government machine to execute his will.
You'd think so. You want your top guys working together perfectly.
But Sergo's account shows a leader who deliberately and intentionally fractured his inner circle.
He was the ultimate anti-manager. Instead of building a cohesive executive team, Stalin was an absolute master of sowing discord and paranoia.
Sergo describes the mechanics of this brilliantly.
He does. Stalin would take one deputy aside, say Molotov, and whisper poison about another deputy, like Malenkov.
He would invent conspiracies.
Or just hint at disloyalty. And then, later that exact same day, he would go to Malenkov and do the exact same thing regarding Molotov.
So nobody trusts anyone.
Exactly. He kept everyone isolated, terrified, and entirely dependent on him as the sole arbiter of truth and favor.
So if two guys started getting along...
Oh, any budding alliance, even just a functional working relationship within the Politburo, was immediately identified by Stalin as a threat and systematically crushed.
But walk me through the mechanics of that, like practically speaking.
Sure.
How do you actually run a continent-spanning empire, manage a planned economy, and organize a military when your top ministers are terrified to speak to one another?
Right.
Doesn't the whole state just grind to a halt?
And that brings us to one of the most brilliant, if sinister, insights in the text.
Okay.
The deliberate inefficiency of the Communist Party apparatus. Stalin purposefully separated ideological enforcement from practical, day-to-day management.
Interesting. So he split the roles.
Yes. He kept the massive Communist Party apparatus focused purely on ideological purity in theory.
Okay, so the party officials aren't the ones actually trying to figure out crop yields or steel production.
No, not at all. The party issues sweeping, often mathematically impossible directives based on Marxist-Leninist dogma.
Like, we will double grain production in 2 years.
Exactly. But they don't actually have to manage the agricultural sector to achieve it. The actual management falls to the state ministers.
Ah, okay. The technocrats, the engineers, the agronomists.
Right.
So the experts are handed impossible ideological quotas by the party. And when they inevitably fail to double the grain because, physics and weather exist, who takes the blame?
The state ministers take the blame, or the local mid-level party officials take the blame for lacking, quote, revolutionary zeal.
Wow.
The entire system was fundamentally designed so that everyone was constantly failing to meet some impossible standard.
That's insidious.
It meant that every single person in the bureaucracy was technically guilty of sabotage, incompetence, or treason at all times.
So Stalin essentially holds a perpetual death warrant over everyone's head.
Precisely. Stalin wielded the ultimate sword of repression, but he forced the party machinery to act as the blunt instrument of blame.
Yeah, he just hovers above it all.
He remained hovering above the fray, cultivating this image as the infallible, wise leader who periodically had to step in and violently punish the guilty bureaucrats who were failing the Soviet people.
It's administratively brilliant, but morally catastrophic.
Oh, completely.
And it connects directly to this concept of systemic culpability that Tom emphasizes in her notes.
Yes, Stalin made absolutely sure that everyone in his orbit had their hands covered in blood.
Sergo mentions that infamous moment at the Yalta Conference in 1945.
Oh, that is such a revealing moment.
Right. Yeah. So they are meeting with Winston Churchill and U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt to divide up post-war Europe.
Right.
And Stalin introduces his father, Lavrentiy Beria, to Roosevelt. Now, Roosevelt doesn't really know the intricacies of the Soviet police state.
No, why would he?
So he asks who this man in the pince-nez glasses is. And Stalin just smiles and says, "That is our Himmler."
Just let that sink in.
Yeah.
Comparing your own intelligence chief to Heinrich Himmler, the architect of the Nazi Holocaust, in front of the leader of the free world, it's a profound psychological maneuver.
It really is. What is he trying to accomplish there?
He's accomplishing two things simultaneously. First, he is establishing a terrifying, humiliating dominance over Beria, reminding him publicly that he is entirely defined by his capacity for extreme violence on Stalin's behalf.
Like, don't forget what you are.
Exactly. But second, he is publicly branding Beria with the ultimate stigma.
He's making sure Beria can never be viewed as a legitimate statesman by the West.
Yes. And he did this internally as well.
How so?
By making every member of the Politburo sign execution orders. By forcing them to enthusiastically endorse the purges of their own colleagues.
Oh, I see.
Stalin ensured that no one could ever claim the moral high ground to overthrow him.
Right, because if Khrushchev or Malenkov tried to remove Stalin, they would have to admit to the horrific crimes they themselves committed to keep him in power.
Exactly. The shared guilt was the adhesive that kept the entire regime from collapsing under its own weight.
So the system is broken by design, everyone is guilty, and ideology trumps reality.
That's a perfect summary.
But what happens when that broken, paranoid machine is suddenly faced with an actual existential threat?
Ah, World War II.
Let's move into the World War II era, what the Soviets call the Great Patriotic War.
Right.
Because when Nazi Germany invades in Operation Barbarossa, this system suddenly has to fight for its literal survival.
And immediately you see this massive explosive tension between the ideological zealots of the party and the military pragmatists who just want to win the war.
The clash between dogma and reality literally becomes a matter of life and death for millions of people.
It does. And Sergo's account provides some incredibly striking examples of this tension.
Take the Battle of Kursk in 1943.
Right, which remains one of the largest armored clashes in human history.
And the official Soviet narrative, the one they taught in schools for decades, heavily emphasized the ideological fervor of the Red Army.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It was all about the indomitable spirit of the Soviet proletariat, fueled by Marxist righteousness, crushing the fascist invaders.
But Sergo, who we should note was trained as an engineer and worked on missile guidance systems during the war.
Which is an important detail.
Right. He attributes the victory to something entirely devoid of ideology.
He argues that they won at Kursk because the Soviet arms industry, which was overseen in large part by his father's vast network, including Gulag labor.
Right. We can't forget that part.
No, we can't. But he argues they engaged in ruthless technological pragmatism. They figured out specific metallurgical and engineering techniques to mass-produce anti-tank weaponry.
Weapons that could reliably penetrate the armor of the new German Tiger tanks.
Exactly.
So it wasn't about, quoting Das Kapital of the Panzers. It was about supply chains, industrial output, and basic chemistry. Competence overcoming dogma.
And that sheer competence was deeply threatening to the party ideologues.
I bet.
This is where we see a fascinating and highly counterintuitive temporary alliance form inside the Kremlin.
Yes, between Lavrentiy Beria, the head of the secret police, and General Georgy Zhukov, the most famous hero of the Red Army.
Which is wild.
I mean, I'm not sure I buy that completely at first glance. On paper, the head of the secret police and the top military generals should be mortal enemies in a dictatorship, right?
Ordinarily, yes. The police are there to purge the military.
Exactly.
But during the most desperate years of the war, both Beria and Zhukov shared a profound mutual hatred for the political commissars.
Ah, the commissars. Sergo's relentless in his contempt for them in the book.
He really is.
Unpack what a political commissar actually did, because the term is so alien to a modern military structure.
Okay, so a political commissar was a dedicated Communist Party official embedded within every single military unit.
Like at every level.
From the top command all the way down to the company level. And their official job was to ensure the ideological purity and loyalty of the troops.
But practically speaking.
Practically, as Zhukov and Beria saw it, they were a catastrophic hindrance.
Right, because you have professional generals trying to plan flanking maneuvers, and sitting next to them is a party hack who has supreme authority over military decisions despite having no tactical training.
Exactly. A commissar could legally countermand a general's orders if they felt the order wasn't spiritually aligned with Soviet doctrine.
That is insane.
They would demand frontal assaults that were tactically suicidal simply to prove revolutionary bravery.
Just throwing lives away for optics.
Yes. But the most infuriating part, according to Sergo's account, was the lack of accountability.
Of course.
When a battle was inevitably lost due to their interference, the commissars took absolutely zero responsibility.
So the general gets dragged out and shot for incompetence.
And the commissar writes a report to Moscow blaming the dead general's lack of faith in Stalin.
It was institutionalized madness.
It really was. And what's fascinating is that Stalin actually recognized this problem when the war started going terribly for the Soviets in 1941 and 1942.
He had a brief moment of clarity.
He did. For a brief window, he sided with the pragmatists. He rolled back the power of the commissars, allowed generals like Zhukov actual command authority, and even resurrected old Russian imperial ranks and medals to boost morale.
He needed the Zhukovs and the Berias to save the state.
He had no choice.
But, and this is the core dynamic of totalitarian paranoia we keep coming back to, the moment the tide turned.
The moment victory over Germany was assured.
Stalin's profound jealousy returned with a vengeance.
The pragmatists had outlived their usefulness.
The example of General Tolbukin perfectly illustrates this pathology.
Oh, that's a heartbreaking story.
It really is. Tolbukin was leading a massive, highly successful offensive into the Balkans. He was breaking through German lines, liberating territory, and on the verge of a crowning historic victory.
And what does Stalin do?
He immediately recalls Tolbukin back to Moscow, right on the eve of the triumph.
He literally yanks his winning quarterback off the field in the fourth quarter.
Why? Why would he do that?
To prevent the general from personally claiming the laurels of victory, if Tolbukin takes the Balkans, the people cheer for Tolbukin.
And Stalin couldn't abide that.
Never. He needed every victory to be credited solely to his own genius.
It's exactly like a toxic CEO intentionally firing their absolute best salesperson right before they close a massive company-saving deal.
Right.
They do it purely so the CEO can step into the boardroom at the last minute and take all the credit, even if changing personnel at the last second risks blowing the entire deal.
The ego of the leader is placed high above the actual survival of the enterprise.
That analogy holds up perfectly, doesn't it?
It really does. And it reveals a terrifying vulnerability in the architecture of dictatorship.
What's that?
A totalitarian leader fears domestic heroes far more than he fears foreign enemies.
Wow. Okay, unpack that.
Well, Hitler was an existential threat to the Soviet state, right? But a victorious, widely loved General Zhukov was an existential threat to Stalin personally.
Because a military hero has independent legitimacy.
Exactly. They don't need the state's propaganda apparatus to be loved by the population. Therefore, the hero must be neutralized the moment the crisis has passed.
And this dynamic of ego, paranoia, and identity leads us directly into another layer of this toxic environment.
Yes.
Which honestly might be the most surprising element of Sergo's entire book.
I agree.
Because we're so used to looking at the Soviet Union through the lens of the Cold War. We view the Kremlin as this monolithic, ideological block of die-hard Marxist-Leninists fighting the capitalist West.
But Sergo's text totally shatters that illusion.
It forces us to drastically reframe our contextual analysis.
Sergo unpacks these incredibly deep-seated ethnic tensions at the absolute highest levels of the Soviet government.
Right. We often forget a fundamental geopolitical irony of this era.
That the two most powerful men in the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin and Lavrentiy Beria, were not Russian.
They were Georgians from the Caucasus,
ruling over a vast empire where the demographic majority was Russian.
And Sergo argues that this ethnic dynamic, this paradox of nationality, drove much of the Kremlin's internal paranoia.
It was an empire where the demographic majority harbored deep historical chauvinistic resentment toward the minority leaders ruling them.
And conversely, the minority rulers harbored a reciprocal, acute distrust of the Russian majority.
Sergo shares a brilliant anecdote about the famous writer Alexei Tolstoy that perfectly encapsulates this tightrope Stalin had to walk.
Oh, yes, the Peter the Great story. This is wild.
Tell it.
So, Alexei Tolstoy is researching a historical biography about Tsar Peter the Great. He's digging through old archives, and he uncovers documents suggesting that Peter the Great's actual biological father might not have been the Russian Tsar, but rather a Georgian king.
Okay, so you would think Stalin, a Georgian dictator, would absolutely love this.
Right. It's historical proof that a Georgian bloodline literally built the Russian Empire.
But Tolstoy brings this discovery to Stalin, and Stalin aggressively shuts it down.
He orders Tolstoy to bury the research completely.
And Stalin's reasoning is what's so revealing.
What did he say?
He tells Tolstoy that they need to leave the Russian people at least one Russian they can be proud of.
There's such a layered response.
It really is. On one hand, Stalin is acknowledging the fragility of Russian national pride and his own necessity in managing it. He understands the psychology of the masses.
But on the other hand,
it shows his acute awareness of his own precarious, almost illegitimate position. He understood that if the Russian populace felt their entire history, even their greatest Tsars, was being co-opted and humiliated by Georgians, the chauvinistic backlash could topple his regime.
He had to play the role of the ultimate Russian patriot to maintain control.
Exactly. Even adopting traditional Russian names for his own children, Svetlana and Vasily.
But behind closed doors, according to Sergo, his father, Lavrentiy Beria, absolutely despised this Russian chauvinism.
This is where it gets really controversial.
Yeah, Sergo claims that his father viewed Bolshevism and the entire communist project not as a genuine global workers' revolution,
but merely as a convenient, modern vehicle for ancient Russian imperial hegemony.
To Beria, it was just the old czarist imperialism dressed up in red flags and Marxist jargon.
Which is a staggering claim. It contradicts decades of Western Cold War scholarship.
Because for a long time, the West viewed Soviet actions primarily through the lens of Marxist ideology.
Right. They're doing this because of dialectical materialism. They're doing that to seize the means of production.
But what Sergo is suggesting, and what Françoise Tom's archival notes largely support regarding the vicious internal factions,
is that ethnic identity, regional power bases, and centuries-old historical grievances played a much larger role in determining Kremlin politics than reading Das Kapital ever did.
So when Beria is making political moves, he isn't just a communist fighting capitalists.
No, he is a Georgian navigating a deadly sea of resentful Russian apparatchiks.
This ethnic tension becomes the kindling for the final, terrifying chapter of Stalin's life.
The post-war years.
Right. The war ends. The external threat of Germany is gone. And so the machine does what it's designed to do. It turns entirely inward.
The timeline leading up to Stalin's death in early 1953 is defined by a suffocating, almost hallucinatory level of paranoia inside the Kremlin.
Stalin is aging, his physical health is failing.
And his psychological state is deteriorating rapidly. He begins preparing a massive new purge.
Who is he targeting this time?
His goal is to entirely eliminate the old Politburo Guard. The men like Beria, Molotov, and Malenkov who had survived the horrors of the 1930s with him.
Why them?
He wants to replace them with younger, more malleable functionaries who have no independent power bases, no memory of his past mistakes, and who owe their entire existence solely to him.
And his primary target, the man he fears most because he controls the domestic intelligence apparatus, is Lavrentiy Beria.
Exactly. So Stalin starts manufacturing elaborate, insane conspiracies to justify arresting his own inner circle.
He invents what becomes known as the Mingrelian conspiracy. Let's unpack that.
Sure. Mingrelia is a specific geographic and cultural region within the Republic of Georgia.
And it also happens to be exactly where Lavrentiy Beria is from.
Right, and where his deepest patronage networks are rooted.
So the mechanism of this conspiracy is just a masterclass in bureaucratic terror. Stalin doesn't just arrest Beria, he attacks his foundation.
He orders the arrest of tens of thousands of party officials, intellectuals, and citizens in Georgia,
And he has them systematically tortured by the state security apparatus.
solely to extract forced confessions that Beria is secretly a bourgeois nationalist plotting to secede from the Soviet Union and is operating as a spy for British intelligence.
It's completely fabricated, but the brutality is staggering.
Sergo recounts a chilling quote that illustrates exactly how this terror was engineered.
Prellis.
Stalin has a man named Rapava, the Georgian Minister of Internal Affairs, arrested. And Stalin personally tells Rapava, "I'll make you head of the party in Georgia here and now if you will tell me everything that Lavrentiy has done."
Wow. It is naked, transactional bribery backed by the immediate threat of a bullet.
Stalin isn't looking for the truth. He is actively soliciting the specific, documented lie he needs to legally authorize Beria's murder at the next Politburo meeting.
And around the same time, Stalin concocts the infamous doctor's plot.
Right, accusing a group of predominantly Jewish doctors of deliberately trying to medically assassinate the Soviet leadership.
It's a blatant, cynical appeal to base Russian anti-Semitism, designed to whip up public hysteria and justify a wider purge of the security services that Beria built.
The trap is closing. Beria, Molotov, and the rest know they are dead men walking.
What then?
But then, in March 1953, Stalin suffers a stroke and dies.
And his death inaugurates what historians refer to as Beria's 100 days.
This is arguably the most fiercely debated period in this entire text.
Because immediately following Stalin's death, Beria manages to outmaneuver his rivals in the chaotic power vacuum.
He instantly recombines the Ministry of Internal Affairs and the secret police into one colossal super-ministry under his absolute command.
Overnight, he becomes the most powerful man in the Soviet Union.
And what he allegedly does with that power is wild.
According to the archives Tom pulls from, Beria initiates an astonishing, sweeping program of reforms.
He essentially attempts to start de-Stalinization years before Khrushchev gives his famous secret speech denouncing Stalin.
Beria proposes sidelining the Communist Party entirely from the economy.
He argues they should be replaced by a state machine managed by actual technocratic experts, people who understand economics and engineering, not just ideological purity.
But the foreign policy shifts he proposed were even more radical.
Oh, they were heresy to the Bolshevik old guard. Beria pushed for a neutral, united bourgeois Germany.
He was willing to completely abandon the goal of maintaining a socialist East Germany.
Yeah.
Wait, walk me through the mechanics of that. Why would the head of the Soviet secret police want to give up East Germany? The whole point of the Cold War was building a buffer zone against the West.
Because Beria, unlike the ideologues, had access to the actual economic data. He saw that forcefully communizing Eastern Europe and maintaining massive occupation armies was a catastrophic economic drain on a Soviet state that was still largely in ruins from World War II.
So it was just math to him.
He viewed a neutral Germany as a way to secure peace, open up Western trade, and stop the financial hemorrhaging of the Soviet Empire.
He also proposed an amnesty that released over 1 million prisoners from the Gulag system.
Again, not for humanitarian reasons.
No, because slave labor is incredibly inefficient, and the camps were literally bankrupting the Ministry of Internal Affairs.
And most shockingly, Sergo claims his father even proposed publishing the works of exiled and executed enemies like Leon Trotsky and Nikolai Bukharin.
Publishing Trotsky in 1953 is almost conceptually impossible to grasp for anyone steeped in Soviet history.
Trotsky was the ultimate demon of the Stalinist religion.
Why would Beria do that?
According to the records, his argument was that the Soviet people needed to understand that these men represented actual alternative political factions with different economic theories.
Rather than maintaining the paranoid Stalinist fiction that they were just foreign spies and fascist saboteurs.
He was proposing an end to the ideological monolith.
Okay, so I have to ask the critical question here, the one I'm really struggling with.
Go for it.
Was Lavrentiy Beria the man who personally signed tens of thousands of death warrants, the man who ran the gulags, secretly a visionary democratic reformer this whole time?
That's the million-dollar question.
Was he just waiting for the tyrant to die so he could save the country?
Huh?
Or was this entire de-Stalinization program just a ruthless, calculated Machiavellian chess move designed to disarm his rivals and seize absolute dictatorial power for himself?
If we rigorously synthesize both Sergo's claims and Tom's archival evidence, avoiding the trap of binary thinking, The reality is likely a highly potent mixture of both.
Okay, explain that.
Beria was absolutely not a secret Democrat with a bleeding heart. He was a man with oceans of blood on his hands. But he was also a supreme, calculating pragmatist. He understood, better than anyone else in the leadership, that the Stalinist system of terror and forced labor was economically bankrupt and politically unsustainable.
You simply cannot run a modern, industrialized superpower on slave labor and perpetual paranoia forever. The math doesn't work.
Exactly. So the proposed reforms were real, but the motive was survival and supremacy.
He used the promise of reform to consolidate his own power.
By halting the purges, releasing prisoners, and exposing Stalin's fabricated conspiracies, he was presenting himself as the savior of the bureaucracy.
He was telling the elite, stick with me and the midnight arrests stop.
Furthermore, he intended to use his total control of the secret police archives, the files containing the specific, documented crimes committed by Khrushchev, Malenkov, and the others, to blackmail his rivals into submission.
He was a pragmatist trying to dismantle a bomb, but he was also the man who helped build the bomb in the first place.
And his primary goal was to be the only one left standing when it was finally defused.
But he didn't defuse it in time.
No, he didn't.
Which brings us to the climax of the text, the fall.
Yes.
Beria's rivals, led primarily by Nikita Khrushchev, realized that if they don't move against Beria immediately, Beria is going to either expose them with the archives or execute them.
It's a literal kill or be killed scenario.
So Khrushchev orchestrates a coup.
And how this coup goes down is shrouded in the exact kind of historical distortion we've been discussing for the past hour.
Right. We know the broad strokes. Khrushchev organized a faction within the Presidium, secured the crucial backing of the military under General Zhukov, who hated Beria's secret police, and had Beria arrested at a leadership meeting in late June 1953.
But the specific details of his death are violently contested between the official record and Sergo's memoir.
If you read the official Soviet records, supported by many Western historians, Beria was arrested, held in a bunker for months, tried by a secret military tribunal in December 1953, and then shot in the forehead.
It's the neat institutional version of a purge. It has paperwork, it has a trial, it has a semblance of state legality.
But Sergo Beria adamantly rejects this entire narrative.
He does. He claims that the man tried in December was a double, an actor hired by the state.
Sergo insists that his real father was assassinated in their family home by military officers days earlier, right at the exact time of the initial coup in June.
He argues the entire 6-month tribunal process was a theatrical delay tactic to give Khrushchev and the conspirators time to orchestrate the cover-up and solidify their tenuous control over Beria's sprawling security apparatus.
And honestly, given everything we've unpacked about how the Kremlin operated, Sergo's version is entirely plausible.
It really is. I mean, if you are Khrushchev, why risk even a semi-private trial of a man who possesses an eidetic memory of literally every skeleton in your closet?
You put a bullet in his head immediately, and then you forge the tribunal paperwork later when things have calmed down.
Exactly. But the why of that paperwork, the narrative they constructed around his death, is what's truly fascinating.
We need to analyze why Khrushchev had to paint Beria not just as a political rival who lost a power struggle, but as a literal cartoonish monster.
This is the contextual analysis that brings the entire deep dive together.
Yeah.
When Khrushchev and the others denounced Beria, they didn't just accuse him of wanting too much power or having bad economic policies.
They accused him of being a British spy since the 1920s.
They accused him of capitalist sabotage. They officially branded him with all the horrific sexual crimes and the sadistic, blood-soaked tortures of the entire Stalin era.
Why go to such extreme lengths of vilification?
Because Khrushchev and the surviving Politburo members had a massive existential problem on their hands.
Stalin was dead, the population was deeply traumatized, and the elite knew that the system had committed unfathomable atrocities.
So they needed a scapegoat. They needed a sin eater.
Precisely. By piling all the sins, all the blood, all the systemic dysfunction and terror of the Stalin era solely onto the shoulders of the Beria gang, Khrushchev achieved a miraculous, system-saving political trick.
He managed to completely exculpate himself and the rest of the surviving leadership.
They could stand before the Soviet people and say, it wasn't communism that failed us. It wasn't Marxist ideology that starved the peasants. It wasn't the party that murdered millions.
It was this evil, sadistic, foreign spy who somehow infiltrated our otherwise perfect utopian system.
By demonizing Beria to an almost mythological degree, They successfully saved the ideological legitimacy of the Bolshevik system itself.
It's the ultimate tragic irony, and Sergo comes to this incredibly bitter realization at the end of his book.
He concludes that his father, Lavrentiy Beria, who was supposed to be the ultimate master manipulator, ultimately overestimated the common sense of those around him and underestimated their perfidy.
But Beria thought he could use logic, economic data, and pragmatic reform to fix a system built entirely on ideological fanaticism.
And he was completely outmaneuvered by the very system of lies he had spent his entire adult life helping to enforce.
He built the machine that ground him to dust.
His colleagues used the exact same methods of fabricated evidence, forced confessions, hidden alliances, and historical erasure against him that he had systematically used against tens of thousands of others.
So let's pull all these threads together.
We have mapped out an incredible intellectual landscape today.
We started with the deeply subjective, heavily traumatized memories of a loyal son desperately trying to rescue his father's humanity.
We cross-referenced that with the cold, hard, objective horror of the archival evidence provided by Francois Tom's rigorous methodology.
We unpacked the specific mechanics of Stalin's rule, how he intentionally fractured his inner circle, how he weaponized bureaucratic inefficiency, and how he literally rewrote history with a red pen.
We examined the profound, often fatal tensions between industrial pragmatism and party ideology during World War II.
And we uncovered the hidden ethnic resentments, the deep paradox of Georgians ruling a restive Russian Empire that drove the suffocating paranoia of the post-war years.
Finally, we saw how the brutal, pragmatic reality of Kremlin succession required the creation of a monster to preserve the illusion of a socialist utopia.
It's a stark reminder that history is almost never a clean, simple battle between objective good and evil.
No, it is a grim, muddy, often cynical contest of competing narratives. And the victor always controls the archives.
And knowledge is only truly valuable when we synthesize it and apply it. Applying the lessons of this text to our broader understanding of governance means recognizing that absolute power always relies on massive, systemic complicity.
The system only works if everyone is guilty.
And in that environment, empirical truth is always the very first casualty of ideological survival.
Which leaves us with a lingering, provocative question to mull over as we wrap up this deep dive.
Okay, what is it?
If a political system inherently requires every single participant to be complicit in atrocities just to survive, if your only choices are to pull a trigger or stand in front of the wall, does the concept of individual justice even exist within it?
That is a heavy thought.
And looking beyond the Soviet era to the world we live in today, in our own era of competing narratives, information warfare, and algorithmic truth, how many established rock-solid historical truths are we blindly accepting right now simply because the archives of the losers haven't been opened yet?